It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebest. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tages. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you're listening to us on the radio. Maybe you found us online. Maybe somebody referred this podcast to you. Regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, and click subscribe. Better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you would just take a moment and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career, having an identity, having retirement goals, and then just shutting it off on Retirement Friday without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we start a brand new series on retirement personality types. You know, there's no one-size-fits-all equation for a great life or a great retirement. Everyone has been created differently and has a unique set of life experiences molding each individual. Today, we start with this idea of truly knowing ourselves and our unique personalities. In this podcast, Ben introduces us to the 4 Animals personality test developed by Dr. John Trent, and he paves the way for a retirement deep dive in the shows to come. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, we are back, and we are excited to start a brand new series today where we are going to be talking extensively over the next several weeks about retirement personalities. So I cannot wait to start today's show and start this brand new series. Before we get started, just a reminder, we've got a brand new Facebook group called Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. This is a growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. Look for more tips on living repurposed, Facebook Live, special content, Q&A sessions, and more. Join today, and you do this by going to facebook.com and searching Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. Click join to be a part of this community of people that are ready to make retirement everything it's supposed to be. Ben Tages joins me on the show, and really that is kind of our focus here as we've kind of grown, and I would have some transparency to our listeners. You know, it's like when we first started this podcast now, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, it was really just about, you know, living with more purpose. And now I think the stakes are a little higher, and I feel like our focus is really more about the retiree becoming really everything that he or she is supposed to be.
Yeah, it's about making sure that people that come into retirement not only have that purpose, but become who God created them to be, right? And we know, because we've worked with thousands of retirees, that there is a ton of wealth there. Not financial. I mean, sometimes there's that too, but there's a ton of wealth in just, they know so much. They've got so much to offer this world. Yep. That the stakes are high because we need them involved in our communities.
Yeah. Well, again, as we make these shows, we think about series, we think about content, you know, again, we lament over the fact of just trying to figure out what can we say to bring to people to really motivate them, inspire, something click, maybe a piece of the puzzle come together where retirees and really anybody listening, it's not just about retirees, but really live on a deeper level. And so that's why I'm really excited about this next series.
Yeah, not only that, Jared, but last show we talked about helping people really become an image bearer, right, of God, and we looked at how to make the world a better place, and that's what Jesus did, right? If we can be more like Him in our daily lives, our communities, our families just become such a better place.
You're talking about the last episode of our last series, and we had about 7 or 8 episodes dedicated to optimizing retirement, and I gotta really vouch for that series. That was some good stuff. If you're new to our show, like I've already said on the podcast, make sure you find us, like and subscribe. But head over to iTunes and look and listen to those shows, because we walk through people a whole path on really optimizing wherever they are in life. But the biggest takeaway that I had from doing those 7 or 8 episodes was that if you're going to have a phenomenal retirement, you've got to have a phenomenal life right now, no matter where you are. There's not this magical switch that happens just because you now take work out of the equation that now your life switches into purpose mode. It's got to start long before that.
Way before that. I mean, it doesn't start at retirement. I mean, light. That's a phase of of life, but it certainly doesn't start nor end really anything other than your day job.
Yeah. Again, if you're not living with purpose when you're working, it's going to be hard to live with purpose while you're retired. And Ben, you've said this a number of times. If you're not happy, if you don't have joy, if you're not at peace, retirement isn't the magic pill that's going to fix all your problems.
In fact, it may make it worse, right? More time kind of accentuates it. It makes things even worse than what they might have been. So if you have those struggles coming into retirement, you've got more time to be thinking about them and really just being with that problem, then it's only going to get worse.
Yeah. And again, a lot of the books that I've read lately, they have to do with how we think. It has to do with psychology. And I think that's going to be kind of a turn as we go through the podcast here over the next several months and hopefully years, where again we're really speaking to how do we live, how do we think, how do we be, and we've talked about that. So again, another plug for all the podcasts we've done, but especially this last series. Please go back and listen to them. They started about 7 or 8 episodes, but some really good stuff there. So today we're starting a brand new series, and we are going to really break down retirement personalities, and we're going to talk about some specific personality tests. We're going to talk about why this is important. We're going to talk about, we're going to give people kind of an overview here today, but let's answer that question, Ben, before we even get started. Why is this such an important part of the retirement piece?
Well, it's an important part for anybody, right? I mean, understanding, part of how you were created. We know who you were created for and whose image, but how, right? So we know there's skills and talents that we're each created with, but we have a certain DNA, the way we go about problem solving, the way we go about interacting with people. That's why understanding some of that stuff about yourself is super important.
Yeah.
So when you were working, maybe you did go through a personality profile, and you've had some interaction with this type of thing. We're going to specifically try to tie it to how it may relate to you now as a retiree.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important for anybody. The more that I learn, the more I grow, the older I get, the more I come to really appreciate knowing who I am, knowing where I've been, knowing how my experience have shaped me today, and understanding that. And it really, I think, to really move forward and walk into fullness, I think you really have to understand where you've come from. We've always encouraged people to look back at past experiences, positive and negative. There's a book I'm reading right now called The Gap and the Gain, and there's actually a chapter in there called Always Measure Backwards. And the point is that for us to really charge full steam ahead, make big goals, do the things that we were created to be, there really has to be a fundamental understanding of who we are. And so really it kind of starts with this. It's know thyself. It was interesting. We had some high school kids in our office not too long ago, and we kind of mutually feel bad for high school kids because there's so much pressure put on kids to, you're going to make a decision here in the next year when you go to college and what you're going to be when you grow up. That's an unfair question to a 17-year-old. They don't know. I mean, they're supposed to understand who they are, and they've only been on planet Earth for 17 years. That's an unfair question.
Yeah, I'd rather be, coming towards the end of my working career and have experienced many different things, and be coming into retirement and then be making that decision, right? Because, and I would say many retirees can. And many retirees can come through, understanding more about themselves as they've worked for years, as they've been in community with others, and then, right, really hone in on some of the things we're talking about to make sure retirement becomes just as great as we know it can be.
Yeah, you could argue that the longer you've lived, the easier this process should be. Maybe not the easier, but you've got more life to look back upon. And so you've got more data, so to speak, to understand this. So I think that is a really good warm-up as to why understanding who you are is so important. So let's talk about personality tests. Ben, we're going to bring up a few here today, and we kind of want to give people a little bit of background. A lot of these might already be familiar with if you're tuning in. One that we've been familiar with is the DISC profile test. Ben, why don't you kind of give us a background on that?
Yeah, I had our entire team go through a DISC profile a while back. I think from a leadership standpoint, it helped me see, how do I lead, right? And how do I interact with others? So basically, DISC is, the D stands for dominance. So like a bold, skeptical type person, that tends to be me. So the I, the influence, this style is both bold and more accepting, right? I'm a little bit lighter on that. S is more steadiness. Like this style is both cautious and accepting. And then C for conscientiousness. This style, both cautious and skeptical.
Yeah.
So there's certain things in there, if you remember, Jared, as we went through the DISC profile, the reason it was so important to our team was it helped us learn something about ourselves, but also how we relate with others, which I think is a key component of any of these personality profiles.
And the one with the DISC is that you could say, hey, I took the DISC, I'm a high D and a low S or something like that. And that's it's kind of a moving scale. You get, you're either low or high on the scale in all four categories.
Yeah, you'll get, I'm a high D, a little bit lower I, absolutely no C, which it doesn't bode well for me generally when I work with others. But I think those are things that helped me and our entire team know, when Ben's acting a certain way, it makes sense now, right? And I think that's important.
I know a lot of companies, you take tours of companies and you kind of walk through their offices. A lot of companies that we are familiar with, they'll have their their nameplate on the wall outside their office, name, and then also too their DISC profile. And so they're like, if John's, a high D and a low C, you better not come in there guns a-blazing, because you might have a fight on your hands. And I'm joking, but that's kind of the idea behind this and working with employees.
Another really, I think what's become really popular these days is the Enneagram. Now, I'm not an expert with the Enneagram scale. I know where I land. I'm an 8, and I know that there's things that I've learned about myself just from reading a few books on that. But I think there's people out there that really can get to understand the Enneagram system. That one's based more on numbers. So if you're hearing this, and we're gonna be going through our specific personality stuff here in a bit, but I'll also give you hints and say, well, if you're this person, you're probably an 8 or a 5, right?
Yeah, I remember taking the Enneagram, or at least I read the book, and I found it very valuable. If you've read it or are familiar, it will say, under low stress conditions, you're this number. If you become stressed or you're under pressure, you default to this number. And I gotta say, by golly, it was really, really accurate in a lot of ways. I don't remember exactly what my numbers were, but I do remember that in particular. And also too, it is true. We're a certain way in front of people. We're a certain way when we're just kind of functioning normally. And then we kind of default to another, I don't want to say personality type, but we certainly default to certain traits when we're under stress.
Each of these profiles, none of them are perfect, but they all have clues, right, to how God created us. They all have clues that when you see them, when you go through the test, you're like, yeah, that does make sense to me. None of this is meant to pigeonhole anybody. Right. It's not meant to be like, oh, you are this way and you are that way. But again, they're tools to help us understand both ourselves, but also how we relate to others. And that's been huge for me. Even in my marriage, I know it doesn't matter what personality test I'm doing, I am the exact opposite of my wife. I'm not kidding. We do these things sometimes for fun, and I could show her exactly what I think she's going to be, and vice versa, because we're so different. Now, does that mean we don't get along? We get along great, 97.2% of the time. Things are going great at home.
That's pretty. It's
specific. There's math there, but I believe that the reason we've been married for over 20 years. And the reason it's been amazing is because we are so different. You may be married to somebody that's very much like you, but I would say most people end up being attracted to people different from them. And then we learn, right? We learn how to best communicate with them, and we learn how to better live with them. And they make us better, right? They're strong where we're weak, and vice versa.
Well, a good counselor, if you've ever been in counseling or spoken to a professional, I think we probably all have more than we want to admit. But if you've done that or been a part of that, a good counselor will pick up on some of these things, that whether he or she is a professional or at least an expert in personality tests, but they'll be able to kind of recite things about you and maybe past experiences and say, you think this way or you react this way because of this experience, or this is how you looked at this part of life. And it's eye-opening, and again, that's good information. That's not, like you said, to pigeonhole somebody or make them feel bad or put them in a corner. It's to say, hey, this is some good information I can use in my life, and that helps me move forward in a specific way. Because as we have seen, there is not a one-size-fits-all deal on retirement. We have tried to make the podcast or write the blog that says, do this, and this works for everybody all the time. And man, it just does not work.
No, people are so different. We were created, again, in God's image, but he created us all with such different personalities, such different skills, talents, abilities. When we look at this stuff, let's be very specific to who we're talking to, like we know, so that you can hear. But if you hear today that there's these personality types and you're trying to figure out which one you are, and then we get into these next few shows where we're specifically discussing the different types, like, well, that's not me. By all means, do not turn it off. Do not fast forward. Do not skip that lesson, because chances are that particular message may be exactly what you need to hear, because you are dealing with another retiree. You're dealing with your spouse who just may be that personality profile. We hope you can learn a lot from that too.
We discussed the DISC. We just talked about the Enneagram. Now we're going to talk about the 4 animal personality test. And just so everybody knows, this is the one that we're going to base our research off of and the next several shows. So Ben, why don't you give people just a little background on what the 4 animal personality test is all about?
So this personality test was actually developed by Gary Smalley and Dr. John Trent. And if you listen to Focus on the Family, you may have heard this personality profile, because they're the creators of it. Essentially, there are 4 animal types within the personality test. There's the lion, the otter, the beaver, and the golden retriever.
Yeah, and it's a really simple personality test to take, and that's kind of why we chose this one to kind of base our research off of, which again, we're going to spend the next several shows and talk about. But just a quick heads up, if you've never taken this test and you want to take it, it's a really simple test. It literally takes like 2 minutes. I've got a link on our Facebook group that I mentioned earlier in the show, Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. And so if you go to that Facebook group, if you're a part of that, you're going to see a link to click on, and you can go through that and you can figure out which one you are, whether you're a lion, otter, beaver, or golden retriever. Ben, I've taken this a number of different times, and I come up an otter every time. And what are you again?
I am a lion.
Okay.
I am definitely a lion, which corresponds nicely with my 8 on the Enneagram.
And also your DISC profile as well.
Yeah.
You're a high D generally.
I'm a very, very high D. So it kind of all fits together. Again, I've learned so much from these different tests. I think what I like you said, is it's simple.
Yep.
This test is very simple. It doesn't get super deep. You don't have to read a huge book, but you can really simply come up with the general personality type. And I love it because it's simple and it's easy to remember exactly who you are.
Myers-Briggs is another personality test out there. We considered doing some research using that personality test, and bottom line, it was just way over the top. There was too many variables involved, and it was something that we just really couldn't gravitate to. So this is the one we're going to go with. Let's spend the next couple of minutes here as we round out this show. Let's talk about these 4 different animals and 4 different personalities before we take our deep dive next week. Let's start with the lion, Ben.
Well, it's easy for me because that's kind of who I am. And I think that you look at the lion, and generally you're thinking of a leader, somebody who doesn't always take advice well, somebody who likes to be in charge, somebody who sometimes doesn't listen the best. I mean, I'm trying to think of all the things that my golden retriever wife have told me about myself, but that's really the reality. A lion is very much it's almost like I see other people as like a threat to myself when I'm trying to be in control. That's who that person is more than anything. They're sometimes very bossy, but the beautiful thing of a lion, I'm going through all the negatives, is that they like to get things done. Mm-hmm. They like to move forward. They like to really be a problem solver, think big picture, right? All those things. There's beautiful parts of lions, but there's, again, lots of challenges too that come about them. If you're an Enneagram 8 or a 5, you're probably generally seeing yourself more of the lion.
That's interesting. The second one is an otter. What does that mean?
Well, an otter, why don't you cover the otter since you're an otter? I like that.
Well, otters generally is a little bit more personable. I think that they tend to have more energy, and if you could just think of an otter, they're kind of always active, floating around the water, and I think that's why they chose this animal for this particular personality type. I would say, and this doesn't come from Dr. Trent's research, but I would say otters are generally wired a little bit high frequency, like a little bit hot, where they're energetic. They kind of have to be moving. They enjoy people, but they also want to kind of get it done as well. But an otter is just that. They're kind of always moving, always busy, always doing something, and many times it does involve others, but not always.
Yeah, and they're moving around a lot. I think that's, there's some beautiful things to otters, but one of the weaknesses is, tend to get distracted, right? Jump around a lot. Sometimes that's taken wrong in that they're moving to the next thing. I mean, we've never done that together, right?
Heavens no.
No, but the reality of it is that's who an otter is. So the beautiful part is super refreshing, full of energy, lots of fun. That describes you very well.
Beavers are next, and these folks, at the end of the day, they're just workhorses, right?
Yeah, beavers. You got to have all these people on your teams, right? And in your groups. But I think a beaver, man, they're creative. They're extreme. They ask a lot of questions. That's what I love about beavers. They're willing to, be inquisitive and continually do that. But they work. Man, they work, and they're generally better planners. They think through things better. I think, if I'd have to say a weakness generally of a beaver is a lot of worry. Sometimes there's some self-blame, some unforgivingness to them, and sometimes come across as almost being somewhat withdrawn at times. So if I look at a beaver, get the task done, do a lot of work, and you're a hard worker, just like a beaver might be.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the idea of team members, because if Ben, you know this. If me and you, if we had a team full of a bunch of me and yous,
it'd be a disaster.
It would be filled with conflict, and it would be a lot of ideas thrown around, and we'd never get anything done. Seriously, so it's good that God created all these different people, and there's people like this trying to encourage people to have other people than themselves on their teams. The last one, we'll wrap up with this one, is the golden retriever, and there's another very specific type of person.
Yeah, I think their strengths would be loyal listeners, right? These are people, I love dogs. A golden retriever type personality listens. They are caring for people. They have this very loyal personality. Weaknesses sometimes withdrawn, right? And maybe not enough initiative at time, and kind of maybe can get a little bit unsure of, am I doing enough? Am I contributing enough? So those are kind of your golden retriever type personalities.
We've got just about a minute left here, Ben. Why don't you give people a warm up for what we're going to talk about and how we're going to tee up these next several shows?
Well, I'm just super excited. I'm always excited to sit here and record with you. But in the past 20 years, as I've worked with retirees, we've noticed certain things about them. And as we've learned more and more about how they interact with each other, how they interact with even their financial professionals, how they interact with people in their community, it's really clear. If we can understand who we are and we can understand who they are, we can better interact with them and make sure that they are coming into fullness in retirement, because, again, it starts with figuring out who you are and how God created you.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this conversation on personality tests and knowing thyself. I don't think it's a coincidence that a common trait of high achievers is their knowledge of how and why they act, function, and think. And this information is crucial not only for your retirement, but your life. So which of the 4 animals are you? Take the test, and here's how you do that. Go to Facebook and join our special group, Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. Again, go to facebook.com and search Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. Join our group. And there I've posted a link for you to take the 4 animals test, and it only takes a few minutes. It's really, really easy. Are you a lion, an otter, a beaver, or a golden retriever? And you're going to want to know this information for the weeks ahead, because starting next episode, we're going to go into a massive deep dive into each personality test. We have done some extensive research with personality type experts and come up with some really insightful and valuable information on how these types of people thrive and even struggle with retirement. So go to Facebook, join our group, and take the 4 animal personality test right now. Thanks again for listening today. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.